Well, hi everyone. It's Kelly at Women for One, and I am really, really honored and overjoyed to be speaking with our guest today, Christopher Dines. And we'll get to him in a minute. I want to give you a little bit of an overview of who this wonderful man is and how he can inform and inspire our community. Because I really believe that Christopher is aligned with the beliefs of Women for One and women stepping into their power, getting awareness of who they are, and making their lives happen the way they want to define it. So I also want to say, as I gotten to know Christopher over the last couple of years, and we've never really spoken live. It's just one of those wonderful friendships that develops over the internet. And I find that his kindness and his supportiveness of my mission and vision and the alignment that I feel with his beliefs and his teachings are really special and unique. So I encourage all of you to listen and look at the topics that we're addressing. If you don't have a lot of time, put this on in your car or when you're working out or when you're making dinner, anything, and really listen to the different topics we're addressing today, because they're all powerful topics that I think each of us can be impacted by and grow from. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you for having me on, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here, and what a wonderful introduction. I greatly appreciate what you're doing at Women for One, and it's wonderful to see the community expand, and I feel it's a very important service.
Absolutely. We're just so excited to be speaking with you. And I want to tell our community a little bit about who you are. And then, I'm going to give some highlights because I like the person to talk about their story, because at Women for One, we're all about sharing our truth and sharing our story. So I'd love to hear that from you. But Christopher Dines he's a mindfulness teacher, a trainer, a writer, and what I love is that he's a former house DJ and producer. So I'd love to talk to you about that a little bit. He retired from the electronic dance music industry in 2006 to kind of find his passion and give public talks on inspirational ideas, self-awareness, and to hold mindfulness workshops and courses. I love that. And I also really love that Christopher trains employers, because we really need that, and employees, um, in intelligence and emotional resilience and mindfulness in the workplace, because I feel like we're all kind of getting away from that, and we separate our mindfulness and our meditation from our work lives, and integrating those, I think, is a really cutting edge and an awesome thing to do. He's also the author of 6 books, and he blogs for the HuffPost UK. And one of them is Mindfulness Meditation, bringing mindfulness into everyday life, which is on our site, but I'm sure you can also find it on Amazon. And today, though, I want to talk about his latest book that he co-authored with the medical doctor and wellness pioneer, Dr. Barbara Mariposa. And it's called The Kindness Habit: Transforming Our Relationship to Addictive Behaviors. And I cannot wait to talk about this, because I think it's such a relevant topic for our country and Europe right now. It's huge. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be where you are today in the teaching that you're doing and the life that you're living?
Well, I started to explore um, self growth, spirituality, self awareness when I hit when I hit rock bottom at 21 as a result of grave alcoholism, alcohol abuse, and cocaine addiction. So it was substance misuse, chemical dependency, that got me to a place where I had to find other ways to live. So there was lots of suffering naturally, which is why I was trying to mask my emotional wounds and my mental suffering and my disconnection from my higher power. That's why I used drugs. But it got to a point where um, mind and mood altering substances weren't working anymore. It wasn't covering the deep, grave emotional wounds. So I hit bottom, and I asked for help. I connected with human beings that were attending support groups, and they were meditating, and they had a different way of living, which looked very attractive, and they had been through similar experiences. And so people would say, "Hey, have you tried reading this book, or have you thought of maybe going to a meditation retreat or a workshop?" And so there was an innate curiosity to find out more about how this all works and how it applies to me. And so it's really it's been a slow, painstaking process to be where I am today, talking to you right here, right now. I've had to literally change every aspect of my previous life, a previous incarnation, if you like. But it's been worth it, and it's for the last 12 years or so, it's been a gradual process of finding my true self, my authentic self, and that for me is wonderful.
That's awesome. And I'm just curious, when you say painstaking and long process, why has it been that way? That kind of sparked that question for me.
Well, the thing is, I developed particular patterns of behavior, addictive patterns of behavior, which were counteractive, they counterproductive, excuse me, they were very destructive. So it wasn't just chemical dependency. I was addicted to alcohol and cocaine, but there was love addiction for me as well. So I was gravely dysfunctional in having healthy relationships with partners in romantic, long-term, loving relationships. So I had to address that a few years after I got clean and sober, and that was very painstaking. I had to go deep back into my adolescence and revisit some traumatic experiences. And I had to learn to trust again. But first of all, I had to learn to trust myself, and that was very difficult because of all the mixed messages that I had picked up over the years. And then learning to trust other people. So that's what I mean, that it's been a gradual process. Plus, then I had to concede that I also had codependent traits. So that was more, how can I put it? That was like I had to assess my need to control outcomes and results, and being obsessed about controlling outcomes and results. And so that would lead me to manipulate all sorts of relationships in ways, and also I was being manipulated because I attracted people that were very manipulative, but I had to look at myself and see what was it about me that was attracting people like that, and what part did I have to play. So there's been lots of grieving, there's been lots of grief and dealing with my trauma, and so that's what I mean by it's been a gradual, slow, painstaking process.
Okay, and that's wonderful. I love the self-responsibility in that, the awareness that you're working through with your personal story as well. I keep hearing in my head, if I was a community member and I was someone who was either suffering from addictive behaviors, which I think personally, I believe that a high percentage of us are in this society right now. That's my personal belief. Uh, when you say, the first thing that comes up to me when you say it's painstaking and long, what was the motivating factor that kept you going to take those baby steps to get where you are today? Because that's kind of, if I was severely addicted or had someone that is severely addicted that is a loved one, I would want to know what the motivating factor is to move into the space of taking those baby steps to come out of it.
Well, all I can do to be authentic is to share my experience, and the motivating factor for me is that um, I have to I have to stay vigilant with regard to addictive behavior, because that's just a ingrained deep trait that's within me, addictiveness. So, for example, I put down alcohol and drugs, cocaine, marijuana, ecstasy. Um, I'm physically sober, might have improved mentally and emotionally, but then I pick up another addictive behavior,
Mm.
say for instance, love addiction or codependent behaviors. I mean, there are so many ways that addictiveness can manifest. So what I've had to do is get to the core of addictiveness, and below that is deep grief and suppressed grief and emotional wounds. But the reason I continue to do this is because I'll never, for me personally, I can't drink alcohol safely. So I'm still vigilant. I still attend support groups
Hmm.
um, and connect with my fellows. So that's a defining factor. But I've also got fellows that can drink, say, a bottle of wine with their partner, or they might be able to, go out on a Friday night to a nightclub, get merry. They might even be semi-drunk, but it's not a problem for them. However, when it comes to other addictive patterns of behavior, again, it could be sex and love addiction, could be pornography addiction, it could be codependency, it could be eating disorders.
Hmm.
They have problems in those areas. So that to me shows that addictive behavior, addictiveness, is very, very complicated. There are many grey areas, but it is possible, one day at a time, to heal from those addictive behaviors.
Wow, yeah. I mean, you hit it on the head, and I feel like, moving into your book now, I want to start diving into it a little bit because I love this book. And the reason there's only been a few books. I am a huge Paulo Coelho fan. Like, he's one of my favorite for all time. And a couple years ago, I read Panache Desai's book. And really, really, just the soul signature really resonated with me. And recently I've read Glennon Doyle Melton's Love Warrior that's coming out in September. I just interviewed her. And I would hold the kindness cabinet on that level because I took notes. I everything resonated with me. I had ahas going through it. And, there were some personal issues going on in my life with a loved one, but in general, this can apply, this book, I think, to anyone. Anyone in this world is facing some kind of codependency, whether it be for themselves and addictive behavior, and self-love issues, and with themselves, and if they can't look at themselves right now, with their loved ones. So bravo to this book. I just love it. You guys in the community, you have to go pick it up, The Kindness Habit, because there's just something about it. It's this dialogue, which I love, Christopher, between you and Dr. Mariposa and an anonymous person on the road to recovery, which I loved because a lot of times things would come up that I would have questions and then I'd read on and that was the question in the book. So it really flowed for me in that way. It was a very unique book in that aspect. And I just, once again, just want to ask you how the evolution of this book came about. I kind of read a little bit about it in your foreword, but just wondering if you could tell our community why you decided to write this in this kind of way.
Well, firstly, thank you again, Kelly. I mean, some of the authors you mentioned have published some great work, so that's very kind of you. And to answer your question, I contacted Dr. Barbara Mariposa, and I watched one of her talks online, and something within me just said to contact her and ask if she wanted to co-author a book with regard to addictive behavior. And so she courageously replied. She didn't know me at the time, and then we arranged to meet up. And so we decided to create a book in the simplest format, which is, we believe, through a dialogue. And then the idea came to include an anonymous fellow traveller who
Mm-hmm.
had lots of questions, and so that worked. So there was a natural flow. Writing a book was very, for me personally, it was quite easy. There was no strain or stress, and I think that was the same for Dr. Barbara Mariposa, although I can't talk for her. And then finally, I contacted the Bradshaw Media Group in Texas, in America, and asked if the late John Bradshaw would write to the forward. And it took about 4 months for him to get back to us, but thankfully and luckily for us, he agreed to do that. And I'm not sure, but he died in he died in May 2016, and I think that might be one of the last pieces of literature that was published. And
That's
his
wonderful.
contribution to yeah his contribution to the emotional health field, addiction, dysfunctional families, the inner child, popularizing the inner child, is very impressive. So for me personally, I was honored to have him grace the book.
I love him. I have many of his books. Yes. He's fabulous.
Mm. So yeah, that's how it came together, Kelly.
Great. So, going into the book, I want to address some themes and just walk through a few highlights of the book with you, if that's okay.
Of course,
Yeah. So, the first thing I want to just talk about is defining addiction, right? And we kind of already have done that a little bit in our conversation today with the codependency. Do you have any other uh, ideas around how people can clearly define what addiction is for them?
um, okay, so addiction is one particular behavior, as we've covered.
Hmm.
Um, but I would suggest that it's a destructive behavior which one cannot stop from doing. So that could be, it could even be on like a cell phone, being on the iPhone all day. I mean, that's like probably a relatively new collective addiction. So let's take pornography, for instance. So in fact, I recently released a blog on the Huffington Post last week with regard to online porn addiction.
Mm.
Now some people can. There are many people that can look at pornography safely and once in a while, or they might watch it with their partners. They might not, but there are many people, and it's come to my attention in the work that I do in rehabilitation centres for addiction in the UK, is that it's actually become quite destructive. There's secrecy and isolation around their behaviour, and it becomes all inclusive in their thoughts. And so that's just one aspect of addiction. Let's say, let's move that on. It could say to with like food, binging food, and then we could move that to say alcohol. You could move that to all sorts of behavior. The question is it destructive? And the difficulty with addiction and addictiveness is that it's a condition of denial.
Right, right.
And that's where the problem lies, because if denial is a massive component to why it's so difficult to address addiction, then that indicates to me why addiction is rife and why it's kind of brushed under the carpet.
Right. And I mean, in this society, I feel like, addiction's about avoidance and numbing ourselves to our feelings. That's for me, I mean, I know that I like to go have a tequila, right? And I don't have an addiction in the way of like, I can't stop, but it's like, why would I want to go have a tequila instead of sitting and meditating or getting present with my feelings? I ask myself those questions, but I still want the tequila. So, I mean, there's this place where, having that awareness and being able to ask those questions around whatever addiction that you find, even that you're drawn to, like, I get sucked into the internet. Like, I'm on social media. I'm like, all of a sudden it's 45 minutes later. And I'm like, what did I just do? But I want to
Mm,
address this secrecy thing because I really resonated with with that part in the book and the toxic shame and sitting with that darkness and fear inside ourselves instead of running from it is one of the things you speak about. Both you and Dr. Mariposa speak about so eloquently, articulately in the book, because a lot of people aren't talking about that. A lot of mindfulness teachers are not really diving into that dark place, the place where we're all avoiding. And I felt like you really went there in the book. Can you speak to that a little?
yes, secrecy. So I had a problem, as I've shared, with love addiction, and I was terribly ashamed that I wasn't able to have healthy relationships with women, from a romantic, again, long-term loving relationship perspective. So I was in denial, and as a result, I wasn't able to receive any help, and that's the problem. It's the shame and the stigma that's attached with the idea of losing control, because um, if you look at society in the West, in Europe, in the United States of America, Canada, to be in control is considered to be a great virtue.
Hmm.
Um, to dominate, not necessarily other people, but kind of to dominate your own destiny and reality. And so, if there's a particular area in someone's life where they intuitively know that it's not working, and they might be suffering in their relationships, they might have dysfunctional relationships, like we've mentioned, codependent behaviors. It could be substance misuse, self harm, eating disorders. That goes against this perfect image of being in control.
Hmm.
And so there's shame and stigma in society. There's shame and stigma. There's shame and stigma in families, in a family of origin, especially addictive families, or where there's been problems with alcoholism and various other grave addictive behaviours. So to come out of hiding and to say I've got a problem is a big risk, and lots of people aren't willing to do that because they've maybe been shamed in childhood, and it brings up too much for them. And that's where the secrecy manifests, and it germinates, and it progresses, and it gets worse, and thus there's more suffering, and it compounds itself. And it's almost like a maze. It's very difficult to break. And for me personally, I had to hit rock bottom. It had to get so bad that I was willing to approach strangers, approach counselors, therapists, attend support groups, and ask for help.
That's amazing. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And I also think, you speak to this. I don't know if you use these words, but I believe in these idealized images that we all buy into. We're fed that by society on how we're supposed to look on the outside. You're just talking about that control space.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can't live up to our own after we become adults and decide what our ideal life would be, or idealized images is what I call them, then we go into secrecy and shame, and then we beat ourselves up. And like you said, I love that image of a maze, because I felt that way in my first marriage. And then I woke up one day and was like, this is not the life I envisioned for myself. So I had to kind of like a big ball of jewelry. I had to untangle it and figure it out, instead of just throwing it all away. Figure out, like, what is mine, take some self-responsibility, what is my ex-husband's. It was a really fascinating process to get that awareness. And I feel like I was in secrecy and shame, pretending that I had this perfect life, and I was so desperately unhappy. And that's what I really, if anyone wants to read a book about dealing with their toxic shame and sitting in it, I think Christopher Dines, he addresses this in this book, and I think you address this in your other books. We're very aligned on that. You got to look at your shit. That's my
Yes,
opinion. Do you agree?
absolutely. I think it was who's it? Thich Nhat Hanh said, "A lotus grows out of mud, not marble floor."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with that said, you talked about I took all these notes as I was reading your book, and the self-compassion versus self-esteem, and how they're not the same. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, my understanding and my view is that self-compassion, there's a deep level of self-acceptance where I can come to terms with my grave emotional wounds, my shadow, that side which I don't want anyone else to know is there. And as a result of that self-acceptance and having compassion for my human shadow, for my hurts, and the result of my behavior, um, and also coming to terms with my humanness, then I can really start to heal. Whereas I'm not suggesting that self-esteem is destructive or bad by any means, but it's more to do with um, kind of pumping myself up and uh,
Hmm.
comparing myself with others. And so I would personally rather have self-compassion and self-worth and self-acceptance than self-esteem. It's quite often people that, including myself, that um, start to discover um, the uh, the the idea of self-realization, and maybe they might start reading, exploring different books, will look to boost their self-esteem, and that can be necessary at the beginning, but generally speaking, there is a necessity to go deep within, and that means that there's going to be grief, and compassion is absolutely necessary when addressing addictive behavior and going back to our childhoods, because if we're not if we can't demonstrate compassion inwards, then it just won't work.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And become vulnerable with ourselves and others, I think is another theme that you really touch on in the book, the vulnerability aspect.
Yes.
Yes. The other thing that I really loved about this book was that it addressed both the physical, like our brain and how that works, and the body with addiction. It helped me to understand it because I've been more focused on the emotional and the soulful aspect of healing, but to understand how the brain works a little bit more. Um, would you agree? I mean, that's probably Dr. Mariposa really brought that aspect of addiction into this book.
Yes, that's what I think was why it's a good combination. She
Mm-hmm.
certainly did do that. I mean, every time I act out in an addictive behavior, I'm enforcing that in my brain, and so I'm wiring that. And every time that I decide, right, I'm not going to act out, then I'm gradually rewiring my neural pathways. But that is going to produce chemicals in the brain. So I'm going to feel discomfort at times. There's going to be emotional agony, and it's part of it's a process where the brain is rewiring itself. The body is healing because trauma is trapped in the tissues and the muscles of the body, and it's got to be felt, and so all sorts of things are happening in recovery from any addictive behavior. There's stuff going on in the mind, there's stuff going on in the brain, and also in the body as well. So it can be overwhelming at times, and that's why it's crucial to have a support group. And that was one of the first things that impressed me with regard to Women for One, that you put yourself out there and founded a community where women can come together and share their wounds and have that support network, or not just in America, but all around the world. And that's crucial to be held.
I do. I think it's so powerful. I was just speaking to a woman the other day that was considering sharing a story of all of this shame she's been holding for so many years, and she's terrified to share it. And she even sharing it anonymously is terrifying for her to feel, because she has so much self-judgment on herself. But she said it's imperative that she does it for her healing process, so she
Mm-hmm.
feels less alone. But she also said, I want to support women that are going through what I went through out there and let them know they're not alone. And I think it's twofold to be able to share your story in that type of way. Um, yeah, so I just really loved the science and the holistic aspect. I feel like the holistic aspect of addressing any kind of addiction or any issue in your life from all the body, mind, soul is so important these days, because that's kind of where we're all moving to in this world, I feel like. So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's just such a this book is so great because of that. So how can people find you and this book? Do you have some events going on that you can speak to us about? Um, Obviously we'll have the link up on the site for people to order your book, but how can they reach out and connect with you?
Well, I have a homepage, which is christopherdines.com, and I'm also on social media. So people connect with me on social media if they go to christopherdines.com. They see all the links. I post on the Huffington Post, or I blog on the Huffington Post. And yeah, I've got some events, but they're in the United Kingdom. So the next public event I'm doing for self-referrals is a mindfulness burnout prevention one-day workshop on the King's Road in Chelsea, which is next month. But I've got all the information, everything that I'm up to at christopherdines.com.
That's awesome. Anyone that's in the UK or is going over there at that time, check Christopher out. And if you want to get the book and read it, we'll have it posted on our site, and you can go to Christopher's site as well. I do want to end with, my favorite thing about the book and you is that, you made a choice to live the life you wanted to, and you took self-responsibility for your life. And I feel like this book and everything that you write really aligns with that self-responsibility and choice. So I wanted to ask you, with that in mind, do you have any wisdom or advice for our community if they're facing an addiction, deciding that they want to shift something in their life? What would you say to them?
I think the most important thing that I've done in my own recovery is to ask for help, which challenges all sorts of structures, belief systems of being self-sufficient and all of that. So that's what's worked for me is asking for help, taking a risk, and things tend to work out. It's when I ask a fellow human being for help, I'm putting out a vibrational frequency to the rest of, or to life, that I'm open and I'm willing to expand. And I think that's crucial, to ask for help.
That's wonderful. Ask for help. It's so simple, but it's so beautiful. So thank you again, Christopher, and we wish you well. And please stay in touch now that you are a Truthteller with Women for One. And we're just so honored to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
All right, everyone. You can check Christopher out on the site and check his other posts out as well on our homepage right now. Thank you.